Welcome, Rancho Community Church. This is our first ever town hall, and for the next hour and a half, we're going to have a dialogue together about Rancho Community Church. So I want to be very clear about what we're doing tonight. We are not rehashing the racial justice issues. We are in constant communication over those. We're in constant dialogue over those. That has populated a lot of our Ephesians series, which is about racial tensions in the church and how to foster unity. Tonight is going to be about how we exist together as a diverse congregation. Because what the racial injustices have brought to the surface is that there are a lot of different views and a lot of different responses to these issues. And so tonight we're going to talk about how one church, one local church, Rancho Community Church, can exist as a highly diverse congregation on mission together. So before we get started, and I'm not going to be up here by myself for an hour and a half, we're going to invite some guests that you know and love up here, and we're going to have some good dialogue. You're going to be able to text in questions, so get those questions ready, and we're going to have a fun time tonight for the next hour and a half. It's going to be very, very profitable, I can guarantee you, and thank you for taking the time. So I'm going to start with a question here. 2020, are we having fun yet? Are we having fun yet? This has been quite a year, right? 6 months ago, COVID started in the East, and it was the slow-moving tidal wave coming to America. Then cases started popping up in America, particularly in Washington State and other places. Cases grew, but in standard fashion, we weren't all that worried about it. We kept going on with our lives. And then just this cloud of stay at home just dropped upon the United States of America. And here we are at home with a lot of fear and uncertainty and all of the institutional and financial consequences of staying at home, to businesses, to jobs, to the economy, unemployment and uncertainty in every household, dealing with these fears. That what is all this going to mean to me and my family and my job and provision? And then in the middle of all this, 3 horrific videos come out about racial injustice, vigilantism, threats in a park, George Floyd. And these images are forever emblazoned on our mind, and they're just the latest in a series of injustices that have hit. Demonstrations swept the nation, swept the world, in fact. The entire world was having demonstrations about racial injustice in the United States of America. And there was some looting and arson, which typically comes along with these kinds of tensions. Anger boils over. It's never right, it's never appropriate, but anger boils over. And this just grabbed the attention, almost the exclusive attention of the United States of America, and even still to this day. In May, COVID numbers went down a little bit, and we got some freedoms back, and we went out and we started living our lives a little more. And so now hospital rates are starting to increase again. Fear and uncertainty is starting to rise again with COVID-19. All of this in an election year. I mean, seriously, you got to be kidding me. Over the next roughly 4 months, $1 billion will be spent in advertising trying to get you mad, trying to get outrage against the other party. That's what election systems are all about. The news media is going to go right along with it. It's a culture of outrage. We live in a culture of outrage. We are on hair triggers. A lot of us, not all of us, a lot of us are on hair triggers. We're walking mad people, and everything that comes across our radar, we're ready to pounce. Again, not everybody, but a lot of us. The tension of 2020 is a tension I have never experienced in my life. I'm receiving a lot of emails from some people who I've emailed. I'm emailing everybody I can get a hold of in the congregation and saying, hey, would you tell me your story about how this pandemic is permanently impacting you and your family? One person sent me this a couple of days ago. Each new day seems to bring more upheaval, and things that we couldn't imagine are happening. That's what a lot of families are dealing with. It's one thing after the other, which just creates anxieties and tensions. All of this during an election season. It's just almost more than you can take sometimes. Someone I love very dearly said to me the other day, I'm just mad at the world right now. Just in a little bit of a funk, I'm just mad at the world right now. And that's understandable. The world is in an unprecedented, I think, state of anxiety, at least in our generation. One of my favorite comedians, Justin Nickerson, he's been here. He recently put on Instagram, what an especially annoying time to be an optimist, right? And I consider myself an optimist. I'm a theological optimist. One of the great criticisms I get around here is Treadway, you think the world is getting better and you think the church is going to bring in this kingdom of heaven? And I'm like, yeah, that's what the Bible says to me. And I'm so excited and so motivated by that. And then we have 2020, and you can kind of pause and say, am I really right on that? But, as I've studied these passages, and even in the midst of this uncertainty and fear, I still believe to my core that all of this is going to be used for the better. All of this, COVID, including the racial tension, is all going to be used for the better, to further advance the kingdom of heaven on this earth. So are we having fun yet? The answer is not really. But I believe this is going to be a time of permanent change. In fact, I'll just tell you right now, the next series on Sunday is going to be called Forever Changed, as we really think about how God uses these trials to forever change us for the better. And not just us individually, but our families and our communities, our church, the nation, and the world. So that's kind of the state of the country. Then there's church life. Church life is always fun. And I say that a little sarcastically. Church culture is weird. I'm just going to say church culture is weird. I love the church. I love the bride of Christ. But as the saying goes, sometimes she ain't very pretty, right? Church culture is weird to begin with, especially in the West, where there's all this individualism in church. And so there's not this great, sort of large church community that you submit to, this high church models. In America, we are fiercely individualistic, which means our relationship with God is fiercely individualistic, which means it's about kind of my opinion and my preference and what I want and what makes me feel good. So it's a lot of individualism at church. That makes church culture a little bit on the weird side to begin with. Then you add all of these tensions of COVID-19 plus the racial tensions plus this bitterness plus the election year, and now all of a sudden what is already kind of a church culture that's very individualistic and nitpicky and everybody's got opinions on every sermon and every song. That's just kind of the way it goes. Now that is heightened to a level that I haven't seen. And we're dealing with that not only in the broader scope of church, but in local congregations. It's not just a national debate about God and church and faith and politics and how all that kind of intermixes. It's every single congregation is having these kinds of divisions. In my roles outside the church, I'm connected with hundreds and hundreds of pastors, and I get to hear their stories, and I get to hear their heartbreak about what's going on in their church communities, what's going on in their localized neighborhoods, and it is heartbreaking. It is bitterly divided, bitterly divided. But we have a vision here at Rancho, and we have been working for a very long time towards this vision with a lot of great success. Our vision is that Rancho would be a beautifully diverse family of faith. Beautifully diverse family of faith. And we're talking about this excitement around generational diversity. And I have celebrated our generational diversity for decades. We have an equal number of young and old and everywhere in between. Our generational demographics are almost perfect in every generation. We had a whole series called XYZ celebrating every generation. It was so exciting to be able to celebrate the fact that we have every generation incredibly represented here at Rancho Church. Generational diversity, ethnic diversity. As our community is becoming more ethnically diverse, our church is becoming more ethnically diverse, and there are very few things that excite me more than that. Ethnic diversity, diversity of life experience, as we get to know each other's stories and as they come from different backgrounds and different perspectives, different upbringings, whether it's religious upbringings, socioeconomic upbringing, inner cities, farms. As people come to the Temecula-Murrieta Valley, they're coming from all over the place with different stories. And to hear the diversity of those stories is remarkable. It's a diversity of opinions as well. And for church, that is very unusual. But that is one of the things I love most about Rancho, is we are not only diverse in our religious opinions and political opinions, we're diverse in specific topics of doctrine, and we love it that way. I have often said here at Rancho, when somebody asks me, hey, what does Rancho believe about this? I say, I don't know. You'll have to ask the thousands of people that call Rancho home. We are a learning community. And yes, there are people that have microphones and stages and platforms and teaching services. And those people, including myself, guide a conversation, guide a learning community on a journey to advance the cause of Christ. Now, that's very different than a lot of church communities. Nothing against other church communities. I'm not even saying this is better than others. But in a lot of other church communities, it's this idea that I go there because I agree with the pastor. I go there because I agree with the pastor. Whatever the pastor says, it confirms what I already believe, and that's what I want out of my church. I want the comfort of being told confirmation of what I believe, and that brings people comfort. And I'm telling you, that can be a great thing for people who desire that, and there's no problem with that. But the vision for Rancho is that it would be different. And that means we get excited when somebody disagrees with me or whoever's teaching up here. Because what it spurs on is conversation. It spurs on dialogue. It spurs on learning. Challenge gets us in the Word. Challenge gets us reading. Challenge gets us discussing, right? And so don't fight the challenge. Don't fight disagreement. We look at the Bible, we teach the Bible, and there's sometimes various ways to look at the Bible, because we don't know what it's like to live 2,000 years ago in the ancient Near East and to know exactly what that author meant to those people that they wrote to. We're guided by the Spirit to try our best by the Spirit's guidance to pull the truth out of the original context so that we can know it and then apply it in our context. And sometimes we don't see eye to eye on that, and that's okay. So what binds us together? It's a common mission. And what is the mission here at Rancho? We've said this a lot. You haven't memorized it. We're thousands of friends advancing the cause of Christ. And the reason why we say thousands is because we've got a large church, we've got a large school, we've got a large community mission of hope, our rescue mission efforts, our local and global impact efforts, that we're a community that is vast, and we love that kind of vast community, because with that vast community comes a vast array of experiences and a vast diversity that we love. And we want it to be in the culture of friendship. Jesus says, no longer call me master. Or he says, I no longer call you servants. I call you friends. The whole culture that Jesus wants to create is a culture of friendship. And it's not just a culture of we come to sit and soak, we come to sit and get fed by another person. It's no, we're friends. We're getting to know each other's stories. We're hearing each other's backgrounds, and we're learning as much from what God is doing in each other as much as we're learning from God's Word. That's the beauty of a family of faith. And that's what we want of Rancho. Unified by a common mission. Thousands of friends advancing the cause of Christ. And when we chose that mission, and this was a staff exercise that then went to the board, when we chose that mission, we thought, yes, this sounds wonderful. Because what it does is it doesn't get us locked into traditional understanding of church. Sit, listen, be fed by somebody else. Advancing the cause of Christ is active. We want to do what he did. We want to see what he started, continued, and one day will be done in full, fully accomplished on the earth as the kingdom of heaven comes. And the will of God is done on earth as it is in heaven. We want to be a part of that. It's actively moving forward the kingdom of heaven. There's nothing passive about following Jesus at all. So we wanted to be an active community, advancing the cause of Christ. Not advancing a religion, not advancing, any one person's agenda, advancing the cause of Christ. That's our struggle. That's our mission. That's what we strive for every day. Does it align with the cause of Christ? And then we have values underneath those. And those values are pretty simple. You've heard them before, perhaps. Revealing God's transforming grace. If Jesus did anything, it's revealing that God is a heavenly Father who loves and forgives by grace. Then growing together in the likeness of Christ. We're not just here to soak up God's grace. We're here to be transformed by God's grace. And what does that mean? God's grace transforms us into the likeness of Christ, that we're called or destined to be conformed to the image of Christ. And so we're all on this journey. None of us has arrived, but we're all on this journey towards Christ likeness. And then equipping the next generation. That's exactly what Jesus did, right? He pulls his disciples together, many of them very young, and he says, I'm going to pour my life into you. Jesus says, I'm going to leave, and it's going to be better that I leave, to be crucified, resurrected, ascended to the Father, and I am leaving the keys to the kingdom of heaven in your hands, next generation, which is why we have a school. Which is why we invest so much in our children's and youth and young adults, and why we want to make sure that those younger generation ministries continue to thrive, because that's what Jesus did. And then helping people in need. And helping people in need has been the foundation of Rancho, just by reputation. If you mention Rancho Community Church, probably the first thing they're going to say is, you do so much good for so many people. Because people know we have this rescue mission, and we launched a farm and school in Africa, and we have so many partnerships all over the world and right here in our own backyard that help people in need. Now, when it comes to helping people in need, there's really two sides to that, and this is what Jesus says is the most important thing: mercy and justice. Now, let me just be clear about mercy. Mercy is essentially finding a need and meeting it. It's really a simple kind of a thing, is we have love and compassion and empathy for people. So if somebody is struggling, if we can help that person, we want to come alongside and help that person in a responsible way so that they can live a better life, and to kind of get out from where they're stuck and to be a little bit more free by tangible help. Justice is a lot more complicated. And that's probably one of the reasons why this is such a complicated season in America and for the church, is because the concept of justice isn't as simple as there's a need, meet it. You're dealing with big items of systemic items, institutional items. Where are the structures, big structures that have been around maybe for hundreds of years, systems that are broken, and making sure that there's not equal access to all the benefits that our society has to offer. This is what it means to tackle justice issues, and that's what Jesus did. Jesus saw a blind man and made him see. Jesus saw a lame man and made him walk. But Jesus also confronted the big systems of the time that were broken systems, the system of religion and the system of the Roman Empire. And so it's difficult. And because we're dealing with so many justice issues here in the United States of America, in a difficult time for the United States of America, the complexity of that is something that sometimes is difficult to navigate. So what's my hope for this town hall? This town hall, for me, I have one goal here in this town hall, and that is to be fair but not afraid. To be fair but not afraid. That's my goal. In fact, that's my goal with every message, and one of the reasons why I manuscript everything word for word is because I want to be fair. Now, because every word I say or anybody who says anything says online is scrutinized, I can just guarantee you I'm not going to say things perfectly today, but I want to say things in a fair way. And so if anything that you hear out of my mouth or any of the others that will be on the panel in the coming minutes, if anything we say doesn't sound fair, just know it's not because of an intent. And so just be patient with us, bear with us. You can send a text. I'll give you the number here in a minute. But we want to be fair. We also want to be unafraid. And I'm telling you that this is a perfect excuse to be afraid. It's a perfect excuse to say, I'm not going to say anything. It's a perfect excuse to say, other people can take a risk. Other people can take a stand. Other people can sort of make comments. Other people can do the work. I'm just going to be quiet because I don't want to get in the fray. It's so easy to be afraid, but we just simply can't, especially for a church that has said in its mission statement, we want to advance the cause of Christ. If you're saying you're advancing the cause of Christ, you are making a commitment to be unafraid, to step into the places that Jesus would have stepped in, including areas of justice, and try to bring change. And so we want to be fair. That's our commitment. That's our heart. But we also are unafraid, which means that today we're going to talk in real terms. We're going to speak in terms of black and white and brown and race and justice and systemic. We are going to use the three words Black Lives Matter just as a description of what's going on out there. We are not today in this town hall going to re-debate the issues of racial injustice and the various camps of racial injustice. What we're going to talk about today, and this is the goal, in a context of being fair and unafraid, is we're going to ask the question and come up, I think, with some good answers with your input, with your dialogue, with your questions, is can this church, we're talking about this church, Rancho Community Church, can this church be remarkably diverse yet unified? Is that possible for this church, Rancho Community Church? There's so much of diversity that we can celebrate here, but can we bring all sides together under one family of faith? And can we not just coexist, but can we truly love each other deeply, serve each other, understand each other, and then actually work together to advance the cause of Christ with our diversity? So I also believe that people ought to be treated like adults. And in church, this might sound a little condescending, and I apologize. In church, that's a difficult thing to do. Because in church, sometimes it's difficult to say out loud, you know what? I don't believe that. You know what? I have a different opinion. I don't see that verse that way. You know what? I think we ought to do this when everybody else is doing this. Adults have the capacity to think, to reason, to have opinions, to create, to have ambition, to do things in a practical way. And so I want this church to be a church where we respect everybody as adults. If you have a different opinion, that's okay. If you have a doubt about something, that's okay. That's part of the journey. Let's talk about it. Let's be adults. Let's be open with each other. Let's be honest with each other. Let's wrestle through issues, but let's do it with humility. Let's do it with grace, believing the best in each other, wanting to know each other, and not wanting to win an argument. And that's really where, again, this sounds condescending, and I apologize. I'm really trying here. But sometimes issues of politics and religion descend into childlike behavior where you just want arguments to win an argument. And I'm taking my ball and going home. I think we can do better than that. And I am so proud of Rancho. I can't even tell you how proud I am of Rancho, because we have dealt with some very hard issues openly and honestly as the Word of God intersects with culture. And we wrestle through things together in mature ways. And we have good back and forth by emails and texts and live and in person. And the unfortunate part about COVID-19 is we are not able to meet live and in person. I mean, we can only have 100 people here on a Sunday morning. And it breaks my heart that here we are dealing with a very significant issue of the Word of God and the justice that Jesus wants to bring, that he says is a priority. And we have these tensions all over the place, and we can't even meet in the building to talk about it and to rub shoulders together. It's heartbreaking. So we're doing our best through interactive live Sunday services and through this interactive town hall. We want this to be an iron sharpening iron moment as we look towards the vision of unity in the church. So here's what I'm going to ask of you. Please don't look for ways to be offended. We're all on hair triggers. It's easy to do that. Don't look for ways to be offended. If something kind of offends you, kind of pricks your soul a little bit, like, oh, that kind of stung, Treadway's not that bad of a guy. You may or may not be right, but Treadway's not that bad. He's not trying to hurt me. If you could just give us that benefit of the doubt, that would be great. Don't read the worst into anything said here. Don't read the worst. Don't look for offense, and then don't read the worst. Please avoid online wars. There's been some very unfortunate things going on online, and some of that within the Rancho community, and it has been heartbreaking. Please avoid that. Please attend here today during this town hall to learn and to understand. This isn't a debate about winning an argument or picking a side. This is about learning and understanding toward the goal of unity in our church community. Please look for ways to unify, not divide. Please look for unity, not homogeny. Homogeny is not unity. It feels like unity because everybody agrees. Everybody could be the same race. Everybody could have the same theology. Everybody could have roughly the same socioeconomic realities. And you might think, yeah, we're pretty unified because when we get together, we all agree. That's not real unity. That's just sameness, right? That's just sameness. Unity is when we can be different and actually build relationship and trust and love each other and serve each other, and then say, you know what, we may not all agree on much, but I love you, and I think you love me, and we can trust each other through relationship, and let's go advance the cause of Christ together. That's the goal here. That's what true unity is. That's biblical unity. And then please focus on Rancho Church. So as you send in text questions, I'm going to give you the number here in a second. As you text in those questions, please try not to text in questions that have to do with which side you're particularly on when it comes to racial justice. We're really not wanting to do that right now. We're wanting to focus on the unity of Rancho Community Church. Can this diverse community live as a family of faith? And how much that tolerance is for diversity. So here's the text-in number, and please feel free to text us in. We have an enormous staff right there just waiting to get your text, and we're going to put them on the screen, and I'm not going to pre-screen anything. This enormous group is, and they're going to put things on the screen for us to answer here a little bit later. So this number we're going to keep on the screen for quite some time, 619-375-3113. And by the way, that's my personal text number. It's my personal text number 2. So I have my kind of personal text for family and all that. This is my Sunday morning church text number. And so people use this all year, whether it's Sunday or not. I can't possibly respond to every one of them. There's thousands of them. But that's yours. Put it in your phone, and feel free to interact with me anytime, particularly on Sunday mornings is when I pay closer attention to that. So text in a question. Now, what I'm going to do before we bring up our panel here is I'm going to talk about a continuum of responses to the racial justice issues that are going on in the United States of America and, frankly, have gone on since the inception of our country. And what I've noticed in the hundreds of emails and texts and comments and actual handwritten letters I've gotten as well is I'm seeing sort of these trends. And I don't want to say categories because people can have several of these different responses, but I'm just going to show you a continuum on the screen behind me, and then you may be able to say, you know what, I can relate with that, response, and I can relate with that. Maybe you don't relate with any of them. Maybe you can relate to several of them. But I'm going to show you the diversity of responses to the racial justice issues that we're dealing with here in the United States of America. So let's start with the Black Lives Movement activists. Now, the Black Lives Movement activists, these are the ones who they're very passionate about the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm not talking about the organization. There's a big debate on that. It's probably the biggest debate I'm having right now is you can't separate the Black Lives Matter movement from the organization. There is a difference. It's a profound difference. Because you're part of a Black Lives Matter movement or you use the hashtag or you have a sign or a shirt or a hat or you use those terms does not mean you fully support all the tenets of the Black Lives Matter organization. It is different. It is unfair to connect those two. There's Black Lives Movement activists. Now, what's happening there is an understandable outpouring of grief and anger from series that seems like endless injustices against people of color. And so this grief and anger and hopelessness sort of pours out in the streets in mostly peaceful protests and political action and demands for change in all of the American institutions, which are happening every single day right now in the United States of America. Some of you agree with those changes, some of you don't. I understand that. There can be debate about that. Now, the more I get to know people of color and befriend people of color, and one of the reasons I'm so thankful that I'm a part of a broader national organization of churches is because I get to go to the inner city in LA and the inner city of Chicago, and I get to spend a lot of time with inner city churches and pastors that lead in very poor areas of these cities and minister to minority communities. And the more I get to know those people and befriend them, I am so excited to build these friendships so that I can understand what they're going through more, because that is not my experience. My life experience has all been here in this valley, and it is literally a valley that is protected by gigantic mountains. It is separate from a city. It is thoroughly middle class. I've called it Disneyland more times than I can count. So that's my experience. And so if I just saw the world through my experience, I wouldn't know 99.99% of what's going on out there. But because I can intentionally get outside of this valley and intentionally make friends with a diverse number of people and hear their stories and frankly cry sometimes with them over their experiences, it creates an understanding. And so I understand the Black Lives Movement activists. Maybe not fully because I'm not living in their shoes, but trying as best I can to hear their stories. Now, there are a few that cross the line into violence. I have condemned violence 4 times at least on Sunday mornings and multiple times privately and on social media. So that kind of violence and looting and arson, it is never acceptable. And frankly, most people in the Black Lives Matter movement and even the organization outright condemn it. Now, some definitely go too far, not just with violence, but also accusing all white people of racism. And that's happened here in our own valley. And I've heard it, and I've seen it on social media. Because you're white, it is assumed that you are a racist. Now, we can tend to sort of react against that. You know, what are you talking about? I'm not a racist. And that would be probably appropriate. If you're not a racist and somebody's attacking you as a racist, there is a time to say, you know what, I don't know. I think you might be wrong. However, I'd want us to kind of back up a little bit and to say, what is compelling that person to be angry against all white people? And maybe to build a connection there, and maybe to go out to coffee, and maybe to hear that story instead of just choosing to fight, to say there's something there that is wounded, right? And that brings me to the second response here. Wounded people of color. I have gotten probably as many emails from wounded people of color as I have white people in this month that we have been really in this very meaningful and profound dialogue as a church. And they're not out there on the front lines, and they're not out there with the bullhorns. They're working, and they're raising families, and they're living their lives. But they're carrying a burden of an entire life that has been lived with all of sometimes this subtle racism and subtle bias, and sometimes outright racism against them. And so their whole lives is defined in part by this feeling that they're not as valuable as others, particularly white people. And so when people of color see that there's now this broader support for this movement, and there's a broader support for racial justice, they get encouraged. And I have received so many wonderfully positive emails that have said, thank you, thank you, thank you. It seems as though the broader community is beginning to support me and to support us. This lifetime of burden that they've been carrying is now being shared with, for sure, the plurality of the United States of America right now. And it's exciting for people of color, especially if they're wounded. Then there are white allies and warriors, and these are formal terms now, right? White allies and warriors. And these are white people who are very eager to get in the fray here. They're very eager to say, you know what, where there's an injustice, I want to come alongside. I don't want to lead, I don't want to be the lead voice at all, but wherever I can help alongside, I want to be shoulder to shoulder with people of color on the journey towards full and true equality and justice and opportunity in the United States of America. These are white allies and warriors. And then there are people I'm calling the empathizers. And these are now, my terms here. The empathizers. These are people whose hearts break with every new instance of racial injustice. They're eager to get to know the painful stories from people of color, to befriend them and to support the cause on a more person-to-person level. They have a heart for their friends who have been marginalized or who have been perhaps a victim of bias at least and flat-out injustice and racism at worst. And there's a heart there that wants to empathize and to grieve with their friends and to support their friends along the way. They may not know exactly what to do specifically, but they know they need to love their friends. They need to love their neighbors. And then I'll call these folks the learners. And these are more of the cerebral folks. And I love getting these emails because they're really eager to learn. They're humble about this, so they're not coming with a hard and fast preformed position. But they're saying, I don't know a lot about what's happening in America or American inner cities or with police or DAs or the jail system. I'm not really up to speed on that. I haven't had to be up to speed, but I want to learn. And so I want to study. I want to read. I want to see the surveys, right? I want to see the peer-reviewed articles. These are the learners. And that's a good group of folks as well. They're humble, ready to learn. Then there's the paralyzed. The paralyzed. These are people who just don't want to see the fighting. They don't want to see the fighting. And they want it all to stop. They're usually kind of the conflict avoiders. Can we just get along? Can we just stop fighting each other, right? And they're kind of paralyzed because everything they say that might try to help sometimes kind of backfires. I'll give you an example that you might be able to understand. I have a friend of mine who put on social media just days after the George Floyd video is can't we live in a world that's colorblind? She was really trying to do something wonderful. She wanted to kind of bring peace to her world, but it backfired because that is very offensive to people of color. And she didn't know exactly why, but it was. And so she's kind of paralyzed right now. I'm not saying a thing. I'm off social media. I'm doing nothing. I don't know what to do. I don't know what to feel. I just want the conflict to stop. And I understand that perspective as well. Then there's what I would call sort of the all lives matter response. And this can be a knee-jerk response as well to say, okay, Black Lives Matter, and the assumption is, well, does that mean Black Lives Matter more than others? Well, no, it doesn't mean that at all. Does that mean other lives don't matter? No, it doesn't mean that at all. And so people want to kind of to cover over the specific issues within racial injustice and to say, can't we just say all lives matter equally? And idealistically, yes, that's true. In fact, we had a good roundtable here on the stage, and you'll see pieces of it coming out on social media and on our YouTube channel in the coming weeks. But it was a great dialogue with about 20 people, community leaders, young activists. We had this great discussion. It was really kind of a great picture of what the church should be, that unified, great, trusting discussion. And one person articulated the all lives matter concept. And actually use the Bible to do that. We're all made in God's image. It was very idealistic. And frankly, it made sense biblically. But can you really say that if it's not in fact true at the street level? If it's not in fact true in a certain group or ethnicity? If it's not actually true to everyone equally, maybe there's a time not to say all lives matter, and there's a time to say, you know what, there's a specific problem there. How about we just choose to help fix that problem, to help bring the change needed? And we pray we could say at one point, all lives matter because all lives actually matter equally. That's the whole goal of this. Then there are what I call the defenders. And these are a passionate group of people. And I understand the position of the defenders. They're passionate about wanting to avoid making white people feel guilty or shameful for being white, or to blame all the injustice on all the white people. And so what tends to happen with the defenders is they hear a lot of this attacking from all sides in their perception against all white people, and they want to step up and to say, well, it's not all white people's fault. Not all white people are racist. It's not my fault. And so they're trying to defend against sort of this pain for pain equation. If one race or ethnicity feels pain, the tendency is to want to make others feel pain as well. It's called transference. It happens all the time. And so the defenders are saying, let's not do that, right? Let's not do this pain for pain thing. Defenders are also very passionate about wanting to support police officers. In their view, and it's, again, understandable, that there are a lot of good police officers. We know, and we all say the same thing. Of course, there are good police officers. 99% are good. As with any industry, as with any vocation, a few people do taint the whole thing. It's very tragic. It is absolutely tragic. So the defenders want to defend the police, and again, that's understandable. I performed a wedding yesterday, a beautiful wedding for the daughter of a police officer, and a lot of my police officer friends were there, and to be able to catch up with them on how are you doing over this past month, and they are heartbroken, and they're frankly discouraged. It's like, this job is tough to begin with, right? I'm putting a bulletproof vest on, a flak jacket on every single day. What other profession is putting on a bulletproof vest every day other than the military? And I'm going out and I'm sacrificing, and I'm trying to keep our community safe. And now they're not feeling like they're appreciated by many people at all. So the defenders want to step up and say, we're going to defend our police officers. And almost every week around here for the past month, I've appreciated our police officers, knowing there has to be changes take place in the industry. But to be able to say, you know what, these are wonderful men and women who are sacrificing so much to protect and to serve. One funny story, there was a local-ish regional demonstration, and one of the Black Lives Matter's leaders had their car broken into during a demonstration. Well, who did they call? They called the police, and the police served them. And it was a wonderful time to just say, all right, we need each other here. We need our police officers. They are frontline keeping us safe. There needs to be some systemic reforms. And there's plenty of great work out there on that regard. That is not my industry, but it's happening. And we praise God for that. Every industry needs to reform to ensure equal justice for all. As with some in the activist response, the defenders can become quite angry and can't even shut down conversation. So at the edges, there could be violence on one side, and there could be not necessarily violence, but violence in words on the other side, which can include, this broad accusation that all of the Black Lives Matter movement is violent. They are rioters, and they are communists. And there's just this unfair accusation from the edges on both sides, and that creates further division. A good pastor friend of mine told me just the other day, he said, I had a longtime member of my church come into my office, and it was right after the George Floyd video came out. And he said, Pastor, looked me right in the eye, and he said, Pastor, if you use the words Black Lives Matter, if you use the words white privilege, if you use the word systemic racism, I'm leaving this church. Just said it to him. At least he was honest. And here's a person who's been a part of the church for decades. Actually, their family, generations have been part of the church. But there was such a sense of defense that even the use of those words, just commonly used words as part of the common conversation, just using the words from a church platform was enough to say we are out. That is extreme. That's where we are at the edges of this discussion. And so for some, those phrases are a dagger to the heart. A dagger to the heart. Those are the defenders, some of them. But keep in mind, it's a dagger to the heart of the Black Lives Matter movement to not use those phrases. And so we're stuck, aren't we? We seem to be stuck. That if you can't even use those three phrases, you can't even speak those three phrases. And for one group, you speak those three phrases, and that's a dagger to the heart. With the other group, if you don't speak those phrases, it's a dagger to the heart. Where are we at? And so the question of today is unity possible? Is unity possible? Some would say absolutely. Absolutely. All you have to do is make sure everybody agrees with me, and then we'll have this unity. That's not the idea, right? Let's go back to the diversity of responses to the racial justice priority in America. Can we put those eight responses back up on the screen here? I'm just going to ask ourselves the question here. Is it possible that all of these people can attend one church? Maybe not the extreme edges of violence and the extreme edges of I can't even hear a word. But can this group attend one church? And not just attend one church reluctantly, but is it possible that all of these people, with all of these responses, can attend Rancho Community Church and to say, you know what, I'm walking into this church with people who don't necessarily agree with me on some political issues, don't necessarily agree with me on racial justice issues, don't necessarily agree with me on little, issues of theology and Bible interpretation, but I love this family of faith. I love these people. I love the diversity. I love our mission, and I'm in. And I would say, and this is a fairly good guess, 90% of Rancho is right there. I have not had more positive emails in all my career as a pastor. 90% just, this is so good, it's so refreshing, thank you, from all these people, all of them. But there's a 10% who are really struggling. And they may be asking the question, I don't know if this is possible. I don't know if this is possible. So I'm going to invite up some friends of mine, and you know them. I'm going to invite up Steve Solomon, Laura Lynn Vasquez, and Howard Frazier. And we're going to have about a 15-minute dialogue around a first question, and then we're going to have your text-in questions to follow. So welcome them. If you're at home, applaud. Yay. These are good group of people. Obviously, Steve Solomon is lead teaching pastor in Marietta. Laura Lynn Vasquez is our connection pastor here in Temecula. And Howard Frazier is one of our governing pastors. You might know them as elders here at Rancho, helping to supervise everything. Temecula, Marietta, Rancho en Espanol, Rancho Christian School, and Community Mission of Hope. So that's a big job. You're my boss as well. So, so good to have you here. So good to have you here. So the first question we're going to ask is, how can this unity happen in a local church? How can a local church experience true biblical unity with so much diversity? Who's first? You got to solve it right now.
All right, I'll take it. This is tough. It's tough. I remember when I first came here, sitting in the back, loving so much of what you talked about, but then every now and then I'd be like, I don't know about that. But what I loved is your text and number was accurate. You would text me back and talk me through it. And so I've seen that it's possible in this church, but it takes drive. I couldn't just get hurt and angry and then leave. One time when I was young, we were at a church. I was probably, Dean and I were married, so maybe like 23, 24. And we went to this class to become a member, and there was a gal that I just did not like at all. I totally disagreed with her, and so we didn't go to that church anymore. And looking back, I thought, how silly. It wasn't the pastor, it wasn't their list of beliefs, but it was this one woman, and I was just young and immature. But it takes drive. You gotta want to have intention that I'm going to be in a room with diverse people. You have to want it. And at 23, I didn't want it. I want it now. And that's why we ended up on the back row of Rancho years ago, because we needed something, and we wanted something that would allow diverse, thoughts to be there.
Well, you brought up a good point that I meant to actually address earlier, and that is, as individuals are having conversations, sometimes individuals are hurting each other. And the assumption is, well, that's Rancho. I'm a part of Rancho, but this Rancho family here hurt me, therefore that's Rancho that hurt me. And that's a difficult thing, and it takes a lot, as you said, it takes a lot of drive to look past that and to say, okay, that individual hurt me by what they said. That's not all of my family of faith. That's one part of my family of faith, and maybe they're wounded, maybe they're hurting, and maybe I could reach out to them, maybe I could walk a restorative journey with them. But that drive is so important, because that drive for unity has to supersede the drive for what?
To have my own way.
My
to
own
be
way
right.
all the time. To be right.
Because there's so many
Sameness.
times I'm not right, and I think I am. I want to be.
Yeah, we all want to be right. We all think
right.
we're right?
Yeah.
But a big part of it is to say, maybe the drive for being right, or I would say more accurately, everybody convincing themselves that they're right. That really does feel pretty good, doesn't it? It feels very good. So to have a drive that says there's something more important than me being around people making me feel as though I'm right, there is a cause, and that cause requires biblical unity. And I'm going to pursue that more than the things I used to pursue.
One of the beauty that comes out of the drive that I'm finding now is that I get to champion people so different from me. You know, no matter what they believe or where they're landing, I can find something that God imaged in them to champion. And that has really been freeing for me, that I don't have to have all the answers. I no longer have to be right. And there's a freedom in that because there's so many people I value that have different opinions, and they may be right, and often they are.
How about you, Howard? How is it possible to achieve this biblical unity in one church?
Well, I think this would be the place to be successful. I am a teacher of history, so I like to go back a little bit in history. And I like to take up what Laura Lynn talked about, the drive, and what should drive us. We are called to spread the gospel. We are called to be one in that message. We do so displaying a love for God and a love for each other. That cannot happen unless everyone behind us is on board. And that is central, I think, to what we are about. And so I will later on, of course, participate in other pieces of our discussion here. But I think we need to be reminded about what we are about. And if we remember that we are one body, and that what we are to do is to reach out to all, we can't do that if we are divided, if we are off on different tangents and can't come together. Because part of what we have to do is demonstrate to the world who we are. And so unless the groups behind us can really come together as a body, not necessarily, as you pointed out, agreeing every time, but that we are central in our faith, we would be together.
So to use the body analogy, finger and toes, we talked about that this morning. It's easy to be in a bucket of fingers. You all celebrate your fingerness. How does a finger celebrate a toe? Just to take the analogy a little too far, but that's really what it comes down to is the person sitting next to me in church, their perspectives, their background may feel very foreign to me, and I may not truly understand. What does it take to get to the point of understanding? And Steve, you talk about that a lot, about understanding. Tell us, your heart about that, and how do we do it?
Yeah, let me give you all the answers.
Please.
My palms are sweating, my heart's beating. I get the joy of teaching every week, so a lot of people out there probably have heard my take on this. But, listening has been something over the last 5 to 10 years that has taken on a new meaning for me. And I think that what I'm seeing as what's causing some polarization is automatic labeling when you hear a word. And so for me, taking what Laura Lynn and Howard saying, it's going to take people to be able to ask a question instead of assuming what someone means by a word. Like you brought up the Black Lives Matter movement or the statement, to ask them what they mean and to ask them what they mean by a certain phrase they're saying. Right now, we jump to a conclusion, especially on the social media stuff. We don't ask a lot of questions. I go through these pages of feeds. There's not one question and all I'm thinking is, I wonder what they meant by that word. Now, I'm not going to jump in on this, right? I wonder what they meant by that. As someone that counsels a lot of couples, we're not doing that good in our homes. So to me, a lot of times what we're seeing in our country is this overflow of what's happening within our homes. It's just a lot larger and a lot scarier when it comes to nationwide or worldwide. But oftentimes when you're seeing two people that have lost the ability to listen and to say, what'd you mean when you said that? Well, I assume you meant this. Well, that's not what I meant. Yeah, you did. Well, it doesn't matter. That's what I felt. Well, that's not what I meant. Okay, well, so learning, I think we have to begin to listen to people and allow ourselves to ask questions so we can get a deeper understanding of what they really mean, what they're really wrestling with. Every single person I'm talking to is wrestling. And I'm talking to people on this is an awesome scale you put up there. I'm talking to people personally on this whole scale. There's not one of them that aren't wrestling deeply with emotions or feelings or confusions or uncertainties or unknowing where we go from here. And that has just caused me to go, man, tell me what you're thinking, tell me what you're feeling. When they make a statement, instead of jumping to my conclusion, everyone says this means this. just asking more questions and trying to not be certain or trying to not convince, but to understand and to accept where they are. Okay, I know that's scary, right? To accept where they are and begin to be on a journey of where can we find common ground, Howard, like you were saying, which obviously Christ and the gospel and love and, and mercy and justice is such a common ground. Everyone wants that. They just have a different idea. So to me, this has been just like a deep time for me personally over the last month, but over the last 10 years, I'd say, on a journey like theologically and philosophically and in real life stuff. So that's what it, to me, will take for all. If we don't do that, this will never happen, because when you start getting to the edges, they know. When you say a word, they assume you're way over there when you might not be, or you're way over there when you might not be. And to really be able to journey, that for me has become real important. And so,
yeah, that's the skill of active listening. And sometimes people don't listen; they reload. And before you're even done hearing a sentence from the other, you've got your reload already there. And that happens when we talk, and that happens when we're on social media. And so the art of active listening is such a powerful skill. And speaking of advancing the cause of Christ, Jesus asked a lot of questions, didn't he? I mean, that's an incredible part of his ministry, is he wasn't just downloading. He was asking questions, building relationship, living life to life, and said, let's walk this journey together. And that's what you mentioned earlier, Steve, just a minute ago, and I loved it, was that everybody's on a journey. Most people are on a journey. Some people are so hard and fast they're not going anywhere, and that's pretty difficult. But the vast majority of people are on a journey. And to assume that somebody's going to walk from here to there on that spectrum there, it's unrealistic. And the angrier we are and the more accusatory we are, the less they're going to move. And so if we really want to help each other grow, and it's not about one direction, but if we want to help each other grow, it's got to be about a patient, humble, relationship-centered understanding. And understanding only comes when we actively listen.
Even in the basic idea that I've reached out to people that just sounded so hurt or so mad, to find out they weren't, just a call and to say, how are you doing? I saw this thing, and oh, whoa, it came off like that. Yeah, and it's right. Interesting. Even the emotions behind something so much different when you talk face to face. And that's really been eye-opening for me. And so I will get on, I won't get an argument with my wife on the text, let alone anybody.
Smart man.
I will not do that, because I can't communicate that well as it is when I'm face-to-face with her, let alone like how she's reading on things. So, man, making a call and really talking face-to-face where it really matters. Because this unity is going to be really more face-to-face unity, right, than, unity of someone that I'm, online with from across the country I don't even know or whatever. And so when it comes to real person-to-person, Rancho Church, you said the focus on here, it's going to be, man, if you feel, like you offended or they offend or whatever, get on the phone and call. Yeah. You'll get more accomplished in 10 minutes on that than 2 hours on going back and forth and misunderstanding each other the whole way.
And that's more difficult. We're in a COVID season. People are not getting out as much, and so it's hard to do face-to-face. And you two are highly relational people as well. I mean, knowing you both, you love that sitting down and chatting and good, deep conversations. And when you can't do that as much and all this stuff is blowing up, it's got to be very difficult. Howard, you love sitting down with people and talking with people. And how, what tips would you give us as far as actively listening and dialogue?
Well, as a teacher, it's a skill that you have, I think, to have.
To be fair, you're also a lawyer, so that's unfair.
Pardon me, all lawyers out there, but happily I have moved away. Yeah. But not just as a teacher, but also since I have been involved in the church as a leader, it is even more important to listen, because you're listening for not just the words, but what is underlying those words. It's very important, because folks will not come to you in full confessional mode. And very often, to be able to help the other, you have to pay close attention to what's being said and be aware of what's underlying to be able to help. And it is also the same with the Word. How many times we have been over a passage one time, two times, many times, but after a couple of years, we get a different interpretation from a different person, maybe from you, Scott. And we realize that we've either had too broad a vision or too narrow a scope on a word that we have read for several times, and in this wonderful book, it has not changed. It has been the same. And so the art of listening is important so we don't miss things, and so that we are able to help each other by listening carefully.
And it's an art. I mean, it takes practice. I have blown it in this season, and I've had to go back and say, I'm sorry. You know, when you're trying to listen on a text, it doesn't work, you know. So it takes a lot of practice for all of us.
I think we need to get to a question here. Do we have questions, team? All right, let's put up the first one. We haven't seen these. How would Jesus lead us to work toward encouraging the government to make real equalizing changes? Cause of Christ, right? The government of his time, there were really two forms. There was the overlying Roman Empire. That was really at a distance. Roman Empire had to deal with the governing authority, which is really the religious leaders. Kind of a theocracy. The Roman government said, hey, listen, we're not going to bother you too much as long as you control your people. And controlling the people typically meant oppressing people, particularly the poor and the sick and the marginalized. And so how would Jesus lead us to impact government toward equality?
Don't look at me. We're talking
Okay,
politics
so,
now.
yeah. It seems to me that he very much was on the local level. He was talking with people personally. He was talking with the religious leaders in front of him. And so that would be my idea, my thought, is that we need to be on the local level and looking at what are the policies. Are they just? You know, do we have exhibit mercy? You know, where are we? Does it line up with the scriptures that we value the cause of Christ? So I would say, from what I've seen him, is on the local level. I didn't see him really addressing the world or the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there was some interaction with the Roman Empire, but it was mainly the localized level for sure. That was the puppet of the Roman Empire. So if you really kind of study the geopolitical dynamics, and I've done just a little bit, I'm a little outside of my pay grade here, but you know the geopolitical dynamics at the time was the Roman Empire was the master over the religious leaders, and they just corrupt payments and all that. But what Jesus did is, what I see is two things. He did have very public confrontations with the oppressors. Matthew 23, he lit them up. I mean, lit them up in public. And this is turning over the tables time. This is screaming at them, the seven woes, publicly in the courtyards. There is a time for public demonstration. And this just kind of bothers some people because our picture of Jesus is Sunday school Jesus. And to think that Jesus was making political demonstration as he's just tearing apart the system, the religious system that was oppressing people, that was a public demonstration. That was a political demonstration. There's no two ways around it. Doesn't fit our Sunday school model of Jesus, but that's what it was. But then you also have John chapter 3, one of the most intimate encounters with a person in power, Nicodemus, a Pharisee. He was one of the guys that Jesus was probably screaming at. And here's this beautiful John 3 moment in the middle of the night, and he gets to know Nicodemus, and what does he do? Asks some questions and leads them down this journey. What it means to be born again. Nicodemus, you're in a corrupt system. You're in a system where there's payments under the table from Rome to oppress the people to keep them quiet. You need to be born again. Well, what does that mean? And they have this great dialogue, and it's the most famous passage in the Bible, talking to a politician who needed to reform. So I would say there is a time for public demonstration, and there are serious issues out there. There are serious issues with police and DAs. One of my passions, and everybody would have their own passion, but one of my passions is housing. The housing situation in America is generationally unfair and weighs against people of color. And the deeper I get into this, the more passionate I get about housing and fair housing and how we can sort of help repair the generational problems that people of color don't have the generational money because they weren't in houses of any value and they couldn't purchase those houses. There's just so much underlying that. And a lot of the wealth of white culture is generation upon generation of home ownership that gets passed on. And that just wasn't available for a lot of folks. So that's an issue the church very much should be a part of. That you follow the example of Jesus, he was in those arenas. Some people don't like that. But that answers the question, somewhat. Is there another question? What are some action steps for the church as a whole to become more united and a more diverse community in the midst of the complacency of seeking sameness? So we're talking about action steps here. So let's get really specific. Laura Lynn, this is your world right now.
It is. I was actually looking for a tool over a year ago for, racial reconciliation and for us to be talking about this because it really wasn't talked about in the church. And so some wonderful women brought me a tool and I became exposed to it. And I think we've just got to dive in. We just need to jump in. It's hard. It's scary. I make mistakes all the time. But in order to be unified, I need to understand where I'm not unified. So where is it that I have blinders on? And I've had a lot of blinders in this area that I'm still uncovering and looking at. And just a lot of stuff I didn't know. So I think it's important for us to just jump in. And when a tool comes to us, to really evaluate it and look for it, I think is really important with that. And just to try. There's a lot of things we can just try.
So Be the Bridge is one of those tools.
Be the Bridge
and so in terms of specific action step, we have these Be the Bridge groups, and it takes, what does it take to join, what kind of character qualities or attitude, probably better said, does it take to join a Be the Bridge group?
Well, you have to have the drive that you want unity. So you can't come in there with, I'm going to just always speak my mind, that I'm right. So there's got to be a humbleness. You've got to come in and say, I want to be able to listen, because the groups are about listening to one another. The goal is a safe place. So you've got to come in saying, I am going to be a safe person in this group, and then I'm going to trust others to be safe in that group. So that's the first step, that you have to have. And when you sign up, and then commit to 12 weeks of talking with strangers and getting to know them. And my group, we became great friends. I mean, I want to do life with them forever now, and it's multi-generational. It's every ethnicity represented in our town for the most part. It's really beautiful.
That's cool.
So definitely, that's one.
Anything else, specific action steps?
Scott, recently I've been following the writings of an attorney who fights for the rights of those prisoners on death row, Brian Stevenson. And he has a fascinating point of view as to what are the number of things that one can do. And I think to respond to the question, one of the things he speaks about is being proximate, being close to the issue. And what he meant by that is, say, for example, right here in Temecula, we determine that in a certain community, there are kids, for example, who are going to school, but they don't have everything necessary. The immediate action would be to give money. But what Stevenson talks about is the better action is you find out really what does the child truly need. It may be glasses. It may be a visit to a dentist's office. It may be some form of health care, so that in learning, he or she is not handicapped. Now, how do you become proximate? You then go to that community. From here, the church, someone who is a doctor, a dentist, an ophthalmologist, and you create the relationship. Because it is from that relationship we will discover what the community truly needs. And that builds the relationship between us and a community in need. And so just one of the steps, I think, is being proximate, being close.
That's good.
Yeah.
I want to mention one other thing that, to become more unified is to intentionally find people that are different than you. So I recently heard a group of people that voted one way and have always voted one way, but just decided to find out about the other side. And so they're intentionally seeking out, they changed how they voted just so they get that mail, in all the flyers and everything. And then they're seeking out those conversations. And I thought that was pretty interesting, So there's ways that if we want to be unified, it's going and finding those that are different than us and hearing their stories and understanding why they think the way they think.
That's good.
Just one thing to add. For me, when I look at this question, I think of like theological issues, stuff like that too. And I think one of my encouragements would be to seek common ground first. And that's not easy to do, but even when I'm hanging out with someone that is a different political side, and you come to realize, like, they really want what's best as well as I do. I mean, I think sometimes we think, well, they really just want everything to be destroyed. And I'm like, well, no, they really don't. And so when I see common ground first and things we can agree and talk about and celebrate and walk together with, then we in a healthier way can move towards some of the things we're not the same in, and we've learned to trust each other. And the story, I said in a message last year, like when you listen to people's stories, an enemy can become a brother or a sister. And when you can come into a common ground and understand the heart behind things and find that common ground first and celebrate that, and I can do that with a lot of like different types of people and theological sides, and and if I can do that, then we can move to the disagreements in a healthier way. But right now we're moving to the disagreements first. And when you move to the disagreements first, it's hard to come to any sort of agreement. It doesn't matter like what that is, like, well, I love my wife too. No, you don't, It's like, there's no way you can, So to me, it would be like to answer this question, we have to learn to come together first, loving each other, accepting each other, and those things and then let's move out and maybe investigate some of those differences that we have and see where that lands us. That's something that I've wrestled
And all
with.
of these action steps are motivated by drive. There's got to be that want to. So I would
Totally.
even say the first action step might be a prayer life that says, God, I am anxious, and I may be accusatory, and I may be on a hair trigger here. I may be defensive. God, I want to seek unity. This is John 17 unity. This is Ephesians unity. God, would you give me the heart to seek unity above this division?
If I could read a verse, because last year we went through the creed, and we did this every week. It just gets stuck in my head, right? In Philippians 2, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each of you look to the interest of others in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset of Christ. I'm sorry, that's so deeply grabbed hold of me as we went through that man, that needs to be the forefront of our thoughts, really, and walking with people.
There's something beautiful when you say that verse as a prayer, Lord, help me. It changes you. It's really beautiful.
Absolutely. Next question. Some of us feel like we have overreacted and kind of joined a bandwagon. Can you speak a little more about how we got here? Was it a knee-jerk overreaction? I'm trying to see underneath this question. It's a great question because I have heard the word bandwagon a lot lately, a lot. I don't know if you have either. It's almost assumed that this is a fad, and I would say the sad part about it is it has been a fad in previous visible in-your-face injustices. There's anger, there's demonstrations. It kind of fades over time. We get back to normal. And so I can understand the question, if that's in fact the motivation of the question, is just this another bandwagon, and are we kind of overreacting to a few instances? And it's a fair question, but I think if you look underneath the surface, there hasn't been just a few instances. It is pervasive. And this is not a bandwagon that started a month ago, last week of May. This is a building tension that says we're kind of tired with not making progress anymore, or even moving backwards, because there's so much left to be done on racial equality. And so I don't think it's a bandwagon. I know we've been talking about it for a long time, and I confessed on May 31st that, we've been talking about these things, and I won't use any of the words, but we've been talking about certain things for a long time. And this sort of, we used to do sort of an incremental, we're working on it, intentionally, and then these 3 instances happen. And it's like, there's no more incrementation right now. We've got to seize this. And so that might be perceived as an overreaction, but I really think it's sort of a pent-up action that needed to happen all along. That's my take on that. I don't know if yeah.
I feel like where there's been this lot of tension, it was like the tipping point. And I also believe the Holy Spirit has been involved in this. There's, when I look at the churches around the world and pastors around the world that are speaking beautiful, beautiful truths, and with, whites with people of color, and they're learning, they're making mistakes, but their heart is wanting to see something different and be able to worship. And that vision of Revelation 7 really coming, that all tribes, tongues, nations are together. That's so beautiful. And I know that that is every pastor's heart that I've ever spoken with. It's just, how do we get there? And I think this has just highlighted it's time for us to actively work at getting there as the church.
I would like to ask you a question, Scott, because I took this as we, meaning Rancho. So when I read it, I kind of said some of us feel like we, Rancho, have overreacted and kind of joined a bandwagon. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more about how we got here? Was it a knee-jerk reaction? And I think about like the conversations we had. When was that? A couple years ago, when there was the other race issues, and we've been talking. A prayer night, and so it's not really new to us, but but maybe people that were here that haven't been here as long or whatever. So I don't know how you'd answer. That's just kind of I looked at it in that way. Not we as a
not
country,
kind of general.
But we as a
and
church,
this is where I attempted to answer that a little bit by saying Rancho was incrementally working on this through these events, through conversations, through the prayer night. And also through specific intentional teaching. And for those of you who have been a part of Rancho for years, you will know that our teaching ministry here has been very intentionally introducing increasingly this idea of racial reconciliation. And because racial reconciliation is really the goal that's going to prevent racial injustice. So I sort of see racial reconciliation, what we can call relationship, right? Genuine relationship. That's the core. If we can live comfortably interracially, you can say, as friends, then the racial injustice is just going to be completely unacceptable. We won't even get to that point because we just live comfortably within our differences. And so Rancho's been intentionally teaching about racial reconciliation, and I am going to use a word I said I wouldn't, but I'm going to. I've specifically taught using the words white privilege a half a dozen times over the last couple of years. And I don't want to, I promised I wouldn't get into that kind of stuff, but that's very specifically what Rancho has been done over the years, is to say, and whether it's white privilege, and I know that's a dagger word, and I'm trying to avoid that, but it's also something that you've got to address. You have to address realities that are creating the systems and the institutions that then perpetrate racial injustice, knowingly or unknowingly. And so it's been hard. It's been hard to teach that. It's been hard to kind of work a town that's changing, because this town was predominantly white, and that is changing. It's hard for some people to get used to a more diverse environment. And so to teach into these biblical truths, but to also teach into a local congregation that says, hey, listen, if we're going to achieve this, we've got to look at ourselves. I'll never forget, I don't think I said this on a Sunday. I don't want to be repetitive. I'll never forget a seminar I went to. This is one of my first action steps. How are we going to do this? This may have been 12 years ago. And I signed up for an inner city seminar on racial reconciliation and racial justice. I was one of a few white guys in the room, and it was in South LA. And I spent a couple of days with this group, and the moderator looked at me and said, "What is your bias?" And I immediately became the defender. It's like, what are you talking about? You said that just because I'm white. You're assuming I have a bias, and I got real self-defensive. And I thought, I signed up for this for a reason. I'm going to calm the heck down, and I answered the question. And I answered it as a confession. These are the biases that I'm aware of right now. When I see a group of people, when I'm in a certain part of the city, there are things in my mind that are there for specific reasons based on my experience, and to do the very, very hard work of identifying that and to say, with all humility and with all sorrow. Yes, there are biases that I have. I've got to find them. I've got to own them. I've got to repent of those, and I've got to do better by friendship, more stories, more relationship. And so, no, this isn't a bandwagon. It's not a fad. We have been doing this incrementally for a very long time. These three videos that came out, the whole nation, and in fact the world, enough is enough. And so I have seen more systemic change in the last month in America, in institutions, in business, in government, and politics, than I have seen in the collective last 20 years. That's just my impression.
You know, and I want to say thank you for taking on that question for me, because what I've seen you do in the Reformed Church of America, in your leadership role there, Community Mission of Hope, and I know that you take a lot of heat. It's just blown me away over the last 10 years to watch you bring reconciliation, even within a denominational Southern California that had no unity. To bring this unity amongst people and churches is just fascinating. So knowing that it's been a long journey for us, I thought maybe that was the question, and so I love how you answered it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And I also want to say one more thing. I don't want to gobble up all the time here, but this is important, I think, because some people are questioning in the church. We're talking about Rancho Church here. Some people are questioning, is this what we're going to be all about going forward? And I hate this, but yes or no to a degree. So no, we're not going to be speaking about specifically the passages in the Bible that have to do with racial reconciliation from now on. The Bible is full of beautiful teachings on a lot of beautiful things. But I will say that part of the permanent change of Rancho is that we're no longer really on this incremental journey of equipping the church towards racial reconciliation. It's just here, and it's a moment, it's a window of opportunity that created a lot of change. And so for us to create a justice department, for us to create a racial justice fund, for us to create, 3, potentially 5 racial reconciliation projects that we're going to go after is going to be very exciting. So I think we're doing, as you said, Laura Lynn, earlier, I think we moved 5 years ahead in our journey right now, and I'm excited about it. But it's not going to be the only obsession of Rancho. So for those of you who might be worried about that, there's a lot of wonderful things. But I'm telling you, when Jesus says the most important things, church, you've missed, are mercy, justice, and faithfulness. We cannot look ourselves in the mirror as a church if we're not saying we are becoming experts at mercy and experts in justice and experts in faithfulness to the mission of God. If we can't say that we're striving for those things, how can we call ourselves like fully devoted followers of Christ? I just, I'm not questioning anybody's salvation. I'm just saying, because that was what you talked about this morning. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying if we want to really advance the cause of Christ, it has to be an obsession on mercy, justice, and faithfulness to his cause. And we've been light on justice. We've been great on mercy. I think very faithful. We've been light on justice. And this is that opportunity, at least for Rancho, to say, no more light on justice. Go. Good? All right. Next question. I'm not going to talk as much. How does Rancho plan to diversify their staff of pastors and leaders to reflect the diverse body of Christ that exists globally and locally? Well, shoot, I guess I have to answer some of that.
Or Howard.
Yeah. So here's the interesting part about Rancho staff. I do have to answer this one because I'm responsible for staff. I am very proud of our diversity. Very proud. Big picture. If you look at our school staff and you look at who runs the place around here, it is this beautiful diversity of men and women. I believe we are beautifully diverse in terms of gender. When I first took the church, women were not allowed to be pastors. They were paid half the money, and they were called directors. We had to change. That's a justice issue. We tackled that. We paid a huge price for that. Biggest price this church has ever paid is this long 10-year journey for true justice for women in this church. That's how I see it. So you look at our staff in terms of men and women, it's beautifully diverse. When you look at ethnicity, we are diverse and getting more diverse. And that's the journey we're on. We have an amazing group of pastors. It is a diverse group. It is becoming more diverse. The part of the issue is you can't just get rid of a quarter of your staff because they're white. But you've got to say, okay, every new staff, we're going to have a fair process, but we are going to have an eye for diversity. And so we have a great diverse staff. We have to do a little bit more work on our pastoral staff. But we've got a committed long-term group of folks there, and I don't want to see any of them leave. We don't have 4 positions open, but we've got to be very intentional about that. So that's the staff issue. We're wonderfully diverse throughout Rancho. We could be a little more diverse with pastors. We are wonderfully diverse in our board. So I took a screenshot of our board at our last meeting. Wonderful diversity of men, women, and ethnicities. So lots of victories in terms of leadership, key leadership, and diversity, but we have a little ways to go. Would you like to speak to that?
Just simply to say that, yes, there's some on the board who are tall and some are short. Some have hair and some don't.
That's great. Next question. As a senior citizen, I have seen injustices over the years, but I thought they were only in other places, not here in our backyard. I regret not seeing it sooner. What can I do as one single senior citizen who cannot go out in public?
You can pray. We need prayer warriors. We need people that are just saying, yes, I see the needs, and I'm going to offer up those specific needs to the world. Sometimes I think we discount that. And, and throughout the scriptures, prayer is talked about over and over again. And Jesus would go away and pray. And I've thought a lot about this, being in the home over COVID. And when I was sick, I was able to journal and pray like I hadn't in years. And instead of just moaning about being sick, I was able to see it as I've got some time because I'm secluded from everybody for 14 days to just be with Jesus. And I don't want us to ever discount that there is power in prayer, and that, that is one thing that you can do.
I'd also say, like, Laura Lynn, you have been so amazing of having call lists and people that need phone calls. So if you're at a place where I can make a phone call to maybe a single mom that's stuck in an apartment. I mean, you've just worked tirelessly of us trying to reach out to everyone in our community here at Rancho. So they can send you an email and say,
Absolutely.
I would like to make some phone calls to maybe a young lady or a single mom or a single guy.
Absolutely.
Or a single woman,
we do
whatever.
need to just be checking in on each
Yeah.
other. So if you can make phone calls, that is a great idea. And we do have a group of people making phone calls, and I'll take the more the better. Some people are getting 3 or 4 calls at a time.
And she mentioned, I think it was the woman, a senior citizen at home, and there's, they need to stay at home. There is a beautiful opportunity to pour in if this person has kids or grandkids. It is a wonderful time to pour into your kids and grandkids, to maybe learn a little bit of technology, get on that Zoom call, get on that Google Hangout, and to pour in the things that you're learning to the next generation, because they'll listen to you. Steve, you've always said what about the oldest person?
That young people will gravitate towards the oldest person that takes them seriously. Right. You might not agree with them, but you take them seriously.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So grandparents, I know, and I've heard from a lot of our senior citizens, they're feeling as though they might be a little bit on the margin because they really do need to be at home most of the time. They can't risk a lot. And they might just feel a little bit more marginalized right now. And I would urge every senior citizen, I think I can understand how that might feel, but try to work through that, where your drive becomes greater than your sense of marginalization, and get on that Zoom call, get on that phone call, get on that text, and pour life into your kids and to your grandkids, because they will take you seriously. And if this has been a journey of yours, because this person mentioned specifically the injustices that they hadn't seen, for you to pour that, well, this is what I'm seeing now, even in my own backyard, and to pour that into your kids and grandkids will mean the world. Obviously, in a way that's not picking a family fight. But,
also, just as a selfish thing, I mean, Scott, Laura, and you two are like frontline workers when it comes to this racial injustice. And any email or text, when we get texts and emails that are just positive and encouraging, it makes a huge difference. And just hearing your story right here, whoever wrote this one, it's like, man, send Scott an email, tell him, send your pastor an email, send your small group, Megan, who does Community Mission of Hope and just is tirelessly working with people in need. Any form of encouragement is so huge. And so send Scott an email. One of the good ones. And Laura Lynn,
I see in this question opportunity. I follow the words of the senior citizen who says that I've seen them but did not think it was in our backyard. And I see that opportunity for us to highlight in our community the areas of injustices that we really don't see. Not because we are deliberately blind, but really sometimes we just don't have the trained eye and we miss things. And this is an opportunity, I think, for us as a church to be able to look at that and be able to say to our members, there's opportunity for us to remove that blinder and to correct some injustices that we may face. Yeah.
Very good. Next question. Going to the Civil Rights Museum changed my life. I am passionate about seeing others like me have a change of heart. I wish everyone can go. Can we maybe establish a fund to send Rancho kids to the Civil Rights Museum? It is truly life-changing. I could not agree more. I haven't been yet, but I'm absolutely going to go. It's a little bit of a journey to get there, for sure. So a fund to get kids there, that's a pretty bold initiative, but at the very least, we could probably do that with our school trip for sure. Rancho Christian, that would make all the sense in the world. We may already do that, I just don't know. But what are some other ways? Let's just kind of broaden this a little bit and to say, what are some experiences that we can guide our young people through so that they understand, even in their formative years, before their brains get hardened, like mine, what are the experiences that we can take them through?
Well, Scott, I like this, not so much of a question, but kind of an observation and question. Earlier, we were looking at a question about the bandwagon. And we are going through, as you correctly pointed out, I think that this change that's taking place now seems different than before. Now, as a historian and someone who is 68 years old, I am hopeful because we have had opportunities before in our history for changes, but they have been glossed over because of other things taking place. In this instance, it's the virus, killing a lot of people. And so we have these two situations coming together, and there's always the danger that one takes over the other and one loses sight of this matter of the injustices that are taking place. So how do we keep that in play? And I look to the young, I look to the youth amongst us to take this baton, and maybe this is where we keep our young with this idea in mind, the idea of where we should do justice. What does that look like? And so for the young to be able to understand that, maybe this becomes their mission for the next generation. And so we should try to find these opportunities to expose the youth so that this idea is perpetuated in the sense that for change to take place, and I've spoken about this before, for the kind of change to take place in our society at this time, it must be transformational. And we, as people of faith, understand or should understand what that means. Because we read Galatians and we know the changes that must take place for us to become mature Christians. We must have a change in our mind and a change in our heart. And I think in this instance, we must do the same thing in this circumstance so that we don't lose sight of the prize, if I may use a phrase that's been used before. But it's the youth, and we need to find ways to encourage them and for them to be on this journey.
Yeah, I could agree more. And one of the things, again, I'm proud of with Rancho, that this isn't our first go-around in terms of promoting justice with youth, is our whole Go Beyond efforts and our trips, a lot of it is centered on justice. Years ago, we started supporting Posse Esperanza in Peru, and this is a whole group dedicated to the injustices against women and young girls who are horribly sexually abused from very young ages. And so to send large teams of our youth to Posse Esperanza to build relationships with these with these girls who have been abused, that changes their life forever as well. To send our middle school students to the inner city, to the LA mission, it's not just about helping, it's learning. They don't go there for helping and photo ops. They go there for days to learn about even the systemic issues around the inner city. So there are things that we're doing already that could include museums, could include reading. I would also encourage us to talk to our kids about this. This is one of the great pleasures for me in terms of the stay at home is our kids are home. Our adult kids are at home. And then we have a 12-year-old. And then this hits. We're able to talk about these things, talk about racial injustices, and you hear a comment and debrief it with your kid. Hear this news story, debrief it with your kids. Hear their opinions. There's a lot of things we could do to raise up the next generation. We have about 2 minutes left. Steve, you have been working with youth for a very long time. You and I both kind of grew up as youth pastors. What would you say in terms of equipping youth in racial justice?
I mean, I think I would just agree with the things you're saying. I mean, we used to take kids every other month down to San Diego and just to experience what's going on in the world. We can tell them. I used to always sit there and go, man, we can just teach the things in the scriptures to them, and I don't have to like tell them anything. Like you should be like this. We just take them. And you go to, I'd say any parents, we've had parents that were afraid, like, I don't want my kid to go to Mexico. I don't want them to go here. I go, man, you know, we got to not be afraid to let our children go outside the walls of our city, the walls of our country, and to realize that there's a lot of eye-opening experiences out there. And so to me, without a doubt, for my own kids as well as any kid, those were the most. I remember I had one of our leaders that was just a camp, just loved camp. And I go, man, we should go to Mexico instead of camp in the summer. He's like, no way, no way. He went to Mexico with me one time and said, let's never do camp again. Like, let's just do this, because it was like so eye-opening, so close. Just the other day, we went out to Hemet, to the My City, and I hadn't been out there yet, into the worst area of Hemet, where the highest crime and what these kids are dealing with. And I just was like, how have I not been here? And so we're working towards that. And I think all of us, you know, Rancho's been about that, community, mission, hope, and just seeing what's going on in our community. You'll see more there than ever. So I've appreciated the Go Beyond and all the different steps that we're taking kids in, and not just talking with your kids, but listening to them. Because my kids understand social justice before I did. You can just say, what do you think about this? That's just wrong. And I'm like, well, it's not actually, you know, and my kids like taught me a lot, because that childlike faith of being able to see things that I get kind of a little bit more desensitized to, and they're not, and they really see things. Yeah.
I want this person to email me, and let's see what we can make happen.
Hey, I love that. That's cool.
Oh, no.
Laurelyn.Vasquez@rancho.tv.
I'll get them to
Just
work.
go ahead
We'll
and email
going.
me. It's going to happen.
Perfect.
Maybe virtually at first, but.
Yeah, I love that. Well, we are done. It is 8:01. It's been a great conversation. Maybe we'll do it again. You've got that text number, so that means I've got your number. So we're going to be in dialogue. We will get to every text, and we'll look forward to having that interaction personally about these issues. And just God bless you. I want to end with a prayer out of Ephesians chapter 4, verse 2 and 3. It's more than a prayer. It's a statement that really goes to the heart of who we should be in racial reconciliation and racial justice. Steve talked on it this morning. It's a great way to end. Always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other. Make allowances for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourself united in the Spirit, binding yourself together with peace. And with that, God bless you, and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday.